This week, my guest is Dr. Renée Lertzman, a psychologist and the founder of project InsideOut. She advocates for a stronger role of psychology in climate action and sustainability. The interview with her reminded me of a quote from a scientist. I cannot recall who it was, but it was something like this. Biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse or climate change can be solved with good science, but selfishness, greed, and apathy need a spiritual and cultural transformation. I don't know if she would agree, but I really think this is a great time for a more humanistic and holistic approach to sustainability. Let's discover how with Renée. Sustainability at Work is a podcast about sustainability in the workplace and in companies. My name is Samara and I've been working with sustainability for almost 10 years. Hello, Renée. Welcome to Sustainability at Work. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I really wanted to speak with you because I think the work you're doing is really very interesting. And this is a topic that we haven't touched in the podcast yet. So I think it's going to be exciting. So I'm going to dive right into it. What do you mean when you say that psychology is the X factor for unlocking action on climate?
Well, it's really because we can't separate how humans basically function, how we process information, how we imagine, how we, respond to different kinds of threats and risk and so forth. You can't separate any of that out from the climate and environmental context, period. So I think that it's actually almost odd that we do that. And that makes me wonder, why do we do that? Why do we approach climate and environmental crises as if they are primarily technical, policy, science, economic, financial, like all of that is obviously the case, but what is underlying all of it is humans. Humans have created this. Humans are participating in this. And ultimately, it's about how we as humans basically figure out how to evolve, develop, grow quickly in a way that is commensurate with the scale of the issues. It's hard for me to imagine that psychology isn't this vital ingredient in the mix, that if we put some attention to, if we actually invested in learning and understanding more about human psychology, and I don't just mean as individuals, I mean individuals, but mainly I mean actually social psychology, I mean political psychology, organizational psychology, that would be absolutely game-changing. It's almost like, to me, my sense is it's almost like watching a group of practitioners trying to address a health problem, a medical issue, without fully understanding the science of the problem. It's like, how can we possibly imagine addressing these issues if we don't actually understand, oh, well, what's the relationship of, how people emotionally are responding to these issues? And how does that then inform the way that people either engage or not with the issues? How do we understand, motivation and what enables behavior change at scale? Like, I can't even see how we can be effective without that.
I completely agree. And I think time is ripe for a more holistic approach to sustainability for sure. And that's why I was very excited to have you here. So you did a famous TED Talk in 2019. What has changed for you in your approach or in how you see this topic since then?
Yeah, so that was recorded in 2019 and then released in March 2020, which is not the best time to have a TED Talk come out. So what has changed is, the whole COVID context changed. So, I did the talk literally right before COVID happened. So it was January 2019. And then by March 2020, the world had changed. So basically everything is so much more heightened now. There's just tremendous instability, a collective destabilization, the whole changeover from Trump to Biden, so much happened. I think that mainly what's happened is, frankly, there's so much more attention now than there ever has been on the role of mental health and well-being. And now people are connecting the dots between, what does it mean to be resilient? The whole resilience conversation. How do we prepare for the times ahead that are going to be, for the unforeseeable future, volatile and uncertain. But really, when I think the biggest change is that I've seen is much more turning towards wanting to understand the connection of the well-being and mental health and psychology with climate and environmental crises. That you can see that in now there's just a proliferation of projects and initiatives and workshops and trainings. And, as someone who's worked in the space now for a long time, for me, it started when I was like 19 or 20, when I was like really not understanding why are we separating these things out. Now it's like, oh, this is becoming more of a thing. And that's very different.
Can you explain me a little bit better what is Project Inside Out that you founded, and what is the methods you're applying with, or your consultancy and on your educational about leadership and everything?
Sure. So Project Inside Out right now is it's a free digital platform. It's a hub. And
with a new website, which is awesome. I love the drawings and everything. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really beautiful. I'm really proud of the design of Project Inside Out. We actually worked with an illustrator based in Mexico, which was just really a fun project. It was very important to me that whatever we created was really accessible and welcoming and didn't feel like a typical climate or environmental space. So basically it came about from a grant initially from the KR Foundation, who are based in Denmark. And it started with what happens if you kind of bring together experts and practitioners in the psychology, public health sector, mental health, clinical work, and sort of pull from that, what are some key practices, tools that a climate advocacy person can use to make their work more effective. At the heart of it are 5 guiding principles that really are the playbook for anyone who wants to be effective, frankly, in the climate space, particularly if you're in an organization. So it's a playbook that kind of walks you through a new way of approaching our work that gets away from a mindset of feeling like you have to campaign and persuade and motivate. So I noticed in one of your podcasts previously, you were talking with someone, and I'm very sensitive to the language that we use. And I'm very sensitive when we kind of unintentionally fall into this framing of I have to persuade someone. The work I do is not grounded or based in a persuasion model at all. I'm much more interested in engagement. So how do we engage? How do we actually become more skillful at having more effective interactions and conversations where no matter who you are, you feel like it's safe to have these conversations, that I'm not going to be attacked or pressured by a climate activist. I'm not going to be shamed. I'm not going to be made to feel like I'm not doing enough. We flip that entirely upside down and basically say, what does this work look like if it's emotionally intelligent? First, you start with attuning. So number one, attune to yourself. So how am I doing? And how am I feeling about the crises? And developing some practices so that I can manage myself more effectively. So if I'm feeling actually really alarmed or I'm feeling really anxious, I know that that's not the time to go and have a conversation with a senior stakeholder, because that's going to come through. So that's just kind of like basic practice. So attune starts with yourself, but really attune is about understanding the other. It's my way of saying user insight or customer insight, or making sure that you understand, do your interviews, do your conversations. So it's really about understanding the 3 A's of people that we're working with: anxiety, ambivalence, and aspirations. And then the second principle is reveal, which is about educating, informing, providing information, but again, through the lens of attunement and through the lens of how do I do this in an emotionally intelligent way. And so that means being empathetic. It means basically saying, hey, this is what's happening with climate and what this means for you and me and us, but doing it in a way that's actually skillful and sensitive. And then 3 is providing people with tools and resources. So every climate organization and team that I work with and sustainability, I encourage them to think about what can you offer others that helps them be effective. So it's not all about me doing all the work, but it's how do I provide a training, a workshop, a course, a lab, a salon, a whatever, masterclass, but how do we give people tools and resources so that they can be more effective? And then convene is this idea, this principle of we have to be working much more as conveners. We have to be bringing people together to have conversations and discussion and dialogue, but especially across different views and perspectives and backgrounds. Like that's just totally vital. The need for inclusion and representation of diverse positions is never needed more than now. So it's this idea of like convening as a way of leading and making change. And then the 5th is sustaining, which is really this idea of how do you keep the momentum going so that you're not just focused on the next campaign, like, oh, we have this big launch or we have a big election cycle. We do all this work and then a lot of that just gets dissipated and then you have to kind of start it all up again. So those are these 5 guiding principles. But then I also have some tools on the website that are pulling from my body of work, which is the quadrant, the theory of change quadrant, and then the changemaker tool, which just is really meant to be a very simple way to self-reflect, and ideally as a team. So I have some very basic, I think they're basic resources, worksheets that are meant to be used as a team. And so it's, anyone can download the materials. And now we're moving into a new phase with Project InsideOut, where I really would like it to become much more of an actual community and a movement and more interactive. Right now, it's just like, there's the tools, you can sign up on a mailing list and that's it. And that's what it was. And now I'm thinking, well, how do I make this an actual community of practice where people maybe go through a training, maybe become certified? I don't know what that is going to look like just yet.
I think COVID was a great alert about the connection that we have in nature, the connection we have among ourselves, the system. But on the other side, I guess we lost so much from the point of view of communities and connection. So, and now you were talking about trying to create this network of people. How do we do that? How we connect people? Because I feel we are, from one side, you look at social media and it seems like we are super connected and we have friends everywhere. We have a huge amount of friends. from the other side, those relationships are not so, I don't know if it's deep but they're not the same. So they're not really creating those networks that maybe we need. How do we cultivate that?
Right. Well, I think it's up to organizations and individuals to start showing up as conveners. So the model of bringing people together, like in circles or in group settings, I think there's going to be more of a trend moving in that direction. And I think it's really a responsibility of, anyone who identifies as being someone who wants to help create change in the world to start thinking very seriously about how do I foster community and connectivity, and whether that's online, whether that's in person, hybrid. I think that's a big part of what I'm trying to do in my work, is to encourage a mindset shift so that people see themselves more as conveners and as facilitators than not, basically. Yeah, I think that we're going to see more and more of that happening. I think we're just going through a phase where, it's all very new, and the fact you can get anything delivered to your house now and you never have to leave, it's like, oh, that's a new thing. There's some novelty there. But I think eventually, people are going to start to want and recognize the need for more connection and community.
And also connected to what you were saying about being facilitators. You often talk about this when you talk about the new kind of leadership that you aspire for people who are working in this area. How do we reconcile this new idea of leadership that you talk about with the kind of leadership that we see emerging somewhere like Russia or any other country with big problem of identity crisis, of populism? I think this is a big topic. I just talked about this in another episode with a social scientist. Identity crisis and leadership are two really big topics in sustainability and in climate change. How do you see it?
Just to orient to what I mean by a new kind of leadership, to be explicit about that. What I mean by that is a leadership that is more open and vulnerable. So that's when I say we need a new kind of leadership, I'm saying that we need leaders who have that ability, the emotional intelligence to actually show up in a way that is more fully human. So to say, these are very challenging times, you might be feeling X, you might be feeling Y, this is what I'm experiencing as a leader, and therefore I'd like to invite you to come along with me with this vision for a new way of being, or how we do lead. And so that is the antidote to the other side. It's like when people feel truly powerless and feel a profound lack of agency, is precisely the conditions where we get attached to, the other kind of leadership, the more just full control. And, it's just, that's exactly what happens, because people are feeling vulnerable and are looking for some semblance of safety and stability and security. So we just see that replay over and over again in history, over and over and over again. So it's not really that mysterious why that we see these swings towards more conservative or populist ideology during times of grave uncertainty and volatility. The answer, to me, the only answer is to actually seed within these communities and populations the ability to talk openly about what's really going on, and to basically say, to acknowledge the anxieties about change, and what does this mean for me, and what does this mean for us. So if we relate this to the climate movement, the most powerful thing the climate movement could be doing right now is having those conversations with the people in the communities that are most impacted and most vulnerable, and actually engaging and fostering real dialogue and partnership, which is not going to be easy. It's going to be, it's painful and uncomfortable stuff. But I'm thinking about people in the US. A lot of people in the US are feeling very threatened by what clean energy transition might mean. Like people who are, and not just energy. I mean, we can relate this to plastics. You can relate this to any number of kind of industrial practices that a lot of people are very identified with and dependent on. And then the climate movement comes along and says, oh, guess what? All of this is unsustainable and we're going to have to change. And if we don't do this within the next several years, everything that you care about and value on the planet is in grave threat. And, that's why I call this existential change management, because it is change management, but on a very deep existential level. And so if we look at change management, in other settings, it often, we already have some playbooks about that. And so what we, for some reason, have not been applying that to the climate work, which is to say, hey, let's do some listening. Let's actually pay attention to what people are experiencing and going through. Let's recognize issues of inequality and justice and vulnerability versus just going out with a big bullhorn and basically saying, if we don't get on board, we're all going to die. That leads to exactly the opposite response usually, which is to get more resistant and more hostile and more in just not wanting to deal with the issue.
My next question was exactly on this, especially with the young generation. Recently, I saw a study. There is a huge increment of mental health problem in the young generation in Europe, but also in the US. Incredibly more powerful than in adults or senior people. What is happening? What is your experience? Are they like closing out and dumbing themselves because they don't see any option? They don't feel that they have agency. What is the problem?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a big part of what's going on is we're not really emotionally equipped to handle the volume of information that is coming at us all the time, especially about what's happening globally and in the world. And so I think that, when that happens and there's an absence of conversation or the ability to process, then what we see is exactly like the numbing and the cynicism and the anxiety and feeling despair and all that. It's really, again, it's on anyone who works in a setting where whether you're a teacher, educator, a leader, a manager, to be able to provide context for people to reflect and process what is happening. And if we don't do that, then we see people, do exactly what's going on now. So, it's not surprising to me that there is this rise of mental health issues, but we're also seeing a lot of mobilization to address that. And probably we're going to see some very creative ways of addressing that. I think that we're going to work through it. We're going to get through it. But right now we're just kind of living in this moment where so much is coming to the surface and it's pretty overwhelming.
A few days ago, I heard, I think you were speaking at Sustainable Grants. You talked about the inner development goals. What are they? We know about the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, but what are the inner development goals?
So the inner development goals are a really exciting new initiative that came together by a cohort of practitioners, mainly based in Scandinavia. And it was actually the people who were helped create the visual language for the Sustainable Development Goals, the color wheel and the icons. Those people, and specifically the people who were the design, kind of the branding design agency, came up with this concept of inner development goals, which is a way to identify what do we need in, as humans to develop in order to be effective at reaching these SDGs. And it's very early, it's very much of a prototype, but it's I think a very clear map of here is what we as humans need to be developing, right? Which is how the 5 tracks are being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And within all of those are specific competencies like systems thinking or courage, perseverance, sense making, empathy, listening. And so what's really powerful about this is that it's drawing attention to the fact that we have to evolve and develop as humans in order to reach these goals, which really takes us back to the beginning of the conversation we had, and why I think we're at a moment right now where we're starting to finally kind of put it all together.
So we are just getting to the end of our conversation, unfortunately, but I wanted to hear if you have some suggestion, actionable suggestion for people who are listening, what they can do in the next month, for example, just to get rid of the sense of not knowing what to do or just being passive, what they can do.
So I guess I would suggest a few things. I think it's very important to take some perspective, to zoom out and to take a bigger picture and recognize that human society, human civilization goes through a lot of shifts and changes, and to try to, take a step back and appreciate that what we're going through now it's not always going to be this way. And that I think that we are, going through a very, actually, in some ways, a very exciting and very powerful time. So it really depends on how you look at it. It's not either it's all going down the drain or it's all going to be okay. It's more about we're in a moment where, as humans, we're really coming to terms with the impact, the consequences of our practices, specifically colonialization and industrialization, which, are completely intertwined. So we're going through that, and that's going to be a bumpy road. So I think that it's very important that people take care of themselves and really put attention to, I can't personally solve all of this, but I am responsible for myself and I'm responsible for my well-being. So I have to make sure that I'm okay. And then I think it's important to always keep in mind, what's my part of the picture? A lot of people are talking about this now, which is, what is my specific unique offering? And recognizing that we all have a vital part to play. And no one, and I don't care who it is, UN, Google, no one has the full picture. No one is going to literally save everything. But everyone has a role to play in varying degrees and levels of impact, right? So what is my impact? What is my contribution to make? And then the third piece is, making sure that you're connected with other people and feel connected with other people who also are on a similar wavelength. So I think it's important we have spaces where we can it's safe to just say, I'm feeling really down, I'm feeling depressed about this, and know that you've got someone who will just listen and not try to make you feel any differently. And a lot of people don't have that right now. If you start talking about how you're feeling about the world and climate and so forth, it can bring up stuff for other people that they may be uncomfortable about, and then be like, oh, that's so negative. Let's focus on the solution. And I think it's important to find people who are going to just basically hold space and be able to listen and not try to tell you should feel or do something different. And that paradoxically is very, very transformative, because it's sort of like this conversation we're having. I'm hearing myself say things I haven't said before. I've never literally said some of the things I've just said to you. I'm making new connections as we're talking. And that's precisely because you're asking me really thoughtful questions. And I sense that you're really listening, you're really engaged, And I know that you're not going to like try to argue with me or make me say, oh, Renee, that sounds so whatever. Like, I know that. And so therefore I can basically say, so yeah, this is what I am thinking about. And this is how I'm feeling. And that paradoxically really helps me move into more clarity about what do I want to do? What do I want to do today? What does it make sense for me to do?
Mhm.
So I think that's really, really important to pay attention to who we're relating with, how we're feeling in those relationships. And then if we're not finding that, find ways of making that happen, whether it's joining a group, finding a community. Like at this point, almost there's many, many places around the world where you can engage and connect with other people who are going to be, on a wavelength.
I think these are wonderful suggestions. I have one last question, which is a question I ask to everybody at the end. Do you have a place or an activity that disconnects you or connects you even more, whatever you like, to the problem, to yourself, or relax you, something like that?
Well, I really, so I live in Northern California, and I really feel very connected with the land and the coast here. And so for me, my place I like to go is an area north of San Francisco, and it's called Point Reyes or Inverness, and it's right on the ocean. But there's also, interestingly, there's quite a bit of agriculture around there. So there's ranches and there's oyster farms and there's dairy, but it's also very wild. And there's a lot of, nature, biodiversity. And so I like that confluence. And so that's where I like to go. That's my place that I feel really restores me and connects me with, sort of I feel resourced when I'm out there. So
Mm-hmm.
I go out as much as I can, but I live down south of San Francisco right now.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And more, you have wonderful places in California and Oregon, which I also love.
Yeah.
Wonderful nature. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Renee. This was a great conversation. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope we can learn more about your work in the next weeks. And I will put some links in the show notes to follow your work. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Bye-bye.
Bye.